I believe the First Amendment is the right of free speech. I don't know if there's any other part of that. Maybe Will knows.
Another part of the First Amendment is religion and the freedom of the press.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Tattered podcast. So the determination was made offline that we should shorten the podcast from Tattered Patriots podcast to just Tattered podcast. It's a suggestion by Will, and I think I like it. So from this point forward, we'll refer to these podcasts as Tattered podcasts. So from there, we'll jump right into it. When I take the boys to school, a lot of times I'll have serious conversations with them. That's my chance when I have them in the car so they can't escape. There's no other distractions like video games that throw us off. So that's my chance to have their ear, and I'll engage them in conversation. Sometimes it's more serious than others. Sometimes it's mostly me talking and just letting them know my thoughts on things and various life lessons that I have learned through my 39 years here on the planet. And sometimes it's asking them questions that get their thought and talking me through things. And we've joked around because those rides to school have become known as Dad's wisdom rides. And sometimes they make fun of them and make fun of me for it, but that's okay. So I think it's getting us all to a better place. So the thought was, that's essentially what we're trying to do here with the Tattered podcast, and having those conversations, bringing some of those conversations in front of you, the listener, and involving you, and hopefully getting you and your families to engage in some of those similar conversations if you haven't already. So let's jump into it. Today, we are going to talk about the First Amendment. Wesley, what is the First Amendment, if you know, and let's start with that.
I believe the First Amendment is the right of free speech. I don't know if there's any other part of that. Maybe Will knows.
Another part of the First Amendment is religion and the freedom of the press.
Okay, so we got freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom of the press. Is that right?
Yes.
Anything else that you guys can think of?
Not that I can think of.
I don't remember if there is anything else.
Okay. The one part, and a lot of people forget this, but it's the right of the people to assemble and petition the government for redress. So it's kind of one that's commonly forgotten. And generally, when people think of the First Amendment, it's freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, things like that. Freedom of speech is a big part of that. It's kind of what we're doing today, but it's mostly in regards to like the public square and what you're able to say and put out there, and it's established so people can kind of get their ideas out there. What, in terms of freedom of speech, Will, why do you think it's important to have that amendment, to have that freedom that was granted to us, the people?
If we'd had no freedom of the speech, then that would kind of mean we don't have any say in the kind of voting, I suppose. We don't have any say on who the president is, or governor, or mayor, or whatever you want to call it. So free speech is important for the fact about that, and the fact if you want to go to court to decide something, being able to speak is a big part of it.
Okay, so what I kind of get what you're saying is the ability to voice our opinions in terms of who's elected, who's in office, how we want our government run, we want our voice to be heard when it comes down to our vote. And that's something that's important for each individual to do, because everybody should have their own individual voice in deciding how the government's run. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. And then additionally, you said something that I thought was an important and a good perspective, is that that freedom to speak out in court. And that could be if you're accused of something, or that could be in the defense of something else, or what have you. But just that freedom to actually talk, and that kind of overlaps with some other amendments where you have the freedom, as much as you have the freedom to speak up and say your part. You have the right to remain silent too, but those kind of overlap, and that's a unique perspective that I don't even know if I looked at before, but I'm glad you brought that up. Wesley, what does freedom of speech mean to you, and why is it important?
Freedom of speech means like that people can talk without having restrictions. So, like if they say something that is forbidden or something that the law says you cannot say, then they would go to jail. But the freedom of free speech gives us, we can pretty much say whatever we want. Just sometimes it might not be right, but we can still say what we would like.
Oh man, you hit on something I think that is so important that a lot of people miss, and that's the fact that it might not be right, but we still have the freedom to say it. So that's a decision each of us needs to make based on our morals and values and everything else. And you need to become citizens of this society. That just because you can say something doesn't mean that it's right to say something, but it's very important that we have that ability to say what we want, because not every government's like that, and we're very fortunate. So that means even with the highest office in the land, which is the presidency, or our other government officials or whatever, we can disagree with them, right?
Yes.
So Wesley, if we don't like how the president is running the country, we have a right protected under the First Amendment to speak our opinion about that.
Yes.
We don't have to agree with everything that he does or she does.
No.
Okay. But we may very well agree with what they do too, right?
Yes.
So that's a lot of power that we have as individuals. We can speak our mind, and we can speak out, and either for or against our politicians, because it's the government is our government. It's not, we're not subjects. We're part of it. So let's move on. So next part of the First Amendment, which Will you brought up, is the freedom of religion. Essentially what it says is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And can talk to me a little bit about what you think that means, the freedom of religion.
I myself think it means that we as individuals can agree in different religions, and no one really has a say in our religion. As in some other countries, they have to be a religion, but being this part of the First Amendment gives us the right for no one to have a say about our religion, and no one being able to stop us from believing.
Good. Wesley, what about you?
It also means that we can be a part of any religion. There isn't just one religion or a couple religions, and people have like the right of establishing a religion, or like no one can be disrespect or treat. Well, you can, but it's not right to treat people from one religion differently than another. And basically, Will covered a lot of it.
Yeah, I think you both hit it, and I liked what you were saying. You kind of caught yourself, how you started to say you can't do this or that in regards to another religion, but you kind of caught yourself because you realize that you can. You do have a right to disagree with another religion, or speak out on why your religion's important or why you disagree with that religion. But you kind of overlap what Will said about the freedom of speech. Is there's, or maybe it was you, but there's a right and wrong way to do that. And any way you do it, you want to go forward and engage in that in a respectful manner. So another part about it is, we don't want our religion running our government. So essentially, you don't want like the church to be in charge of the government. But you want to have the freedom to exercise your religion how you want. So we don't want the government coming and saying, everybody has to be a Christian and follow these rules, or everybody has to be Jewish and follow these rules. People have the right to choose. But do you think in that, that means that everywhere we go, there shouldn't be religion attached to it? Or do you think you can have religion attached to things?
I believe that there can be some religion attached to it, but if there becomes too much religion, then it could get out of hand. But it's definitely good to have a little bit but not too much, and make sure it doesn't get out of hand.
So, do you think one way to do that would be allowing for all religions to be able to express themselves?
Yeah.
How about you, Wes?
Yes, I agree with Will.
Good. Let's move on then. Freedom of the press. First off, Will, what's the press?
The press is more of a news and newspaper and like social media. You have freedom of them, like you can avoid them or you can just come straight up ignore them. You don't have to say anything about the press and you don't have to speak back to them. That kind of is also part, you have the right to remain silent.
Okay. And Wesley, how about you?
You can agree and disagree with the press. You can speak out your opinion. You don't have to believe everything that the press says.
Right, and I think so that's a big. The press has a big overlap with the free speech part of it, right? So the press has a right to put out and say the things that they want, and a lot of times that's based on things that individual people or groups of people collectively like believe and put those messages out. And we have a right to do that. We have a right to establish press and put our ideas out in the form of press and not have it infringed. And for there to be different types of press is important, so that there's balance and everybody's voice gets heard. And what about that last part, the right of the people to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances? You guys understand that? Can you explain that, Wesley?
I think it means people can come together, and if enough people or a lot of different groups disagree with the president or Congress, they can elect another president, or just I don't know.
Okay, I think you're on a good track. Will, do you have anything to say about it? Or?
I did not understand the question that well. Can you please clarify it?
Yeah. So you have part of the First Amendment is the right to peacefully assemble. So that means groups of people that maybe have a similar idea or a belief on something have a right to come together and assemble. So that could be. Have you heard of a protest before?
Yes.
And so many people protest. So that would be an example. You have a right to come together and assemble or protest like that. Do you have any thoughts on that? If not, that's okay.
Not really. People have the right to have their say in it, like the right of free speech, and they have their say, and you can protest, but to a point you don't want too much protest, but technically you are allowed to protest, and that's alright because it's through the First Amendment.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. And I don't know if it's a matter of too much protest. I think, if I'm hearing you right, where I think you're trying to go is as long as the protest is peaceful, right?
Yeah.
You don't want the protest to the point where it gets out of control and it gets violent and
like another civil war.
Right. It's peaceful assembly. So the right of the people to assemble, but it should be peaceful. So you don't want people starting riots, hurting other people, causing damage to property, things like that. But it's important as part of that freedom of speech for people to come together as a group and make their individual voice combined with a collective voice in order to be heard sometimes.
Another thing that I thought of, I was reading this book about World War One and how people came together to escape, like the prison camps. I kind of link it to that by like people are allowed to like come together and not just be alone. They're allowed to come together to elect better stuff. So it's kind of links to that.
Yeah, I think you're right because there's we're protected individually with these rights, but there's a lot of power by combining forces with other people that think the same thing and having like strength in numbers essentially. So with your example, those people were more powerful when they were able to assemble and become together. And one thing that this right is trying to protect, it's trying to protect that right to assemble and become together and have a strong, united voice as groups, because sometimes just as the individual, like our individual voice can get like washed out. But as long as we have that right protected under the Bill of Rights to assemble and combine that right with other people like it, we have strength and able to do that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and like groups can, like say a group, like there's a group in the prison camp, and then the people saw them working together of like an escape plan, so they would like spread them out across other prison camps. So then they couldn't like work together. It'd be like the U.S. like there's groups that disagree. They would put them apart from each other so they couldn't have much of an impact, because if there's a big group talking against the government or against the press or something, then their voice is more likely to be heard. If it's just one individual, some people here and there be like, oh okay, that's a good point, but it might not do as much of an effect.
Yeah, I agree. If I can ask you, like, I mean, I'll say this. So I personally think that sometimes the press can do this, and different outlets with different power might use this to divide people up, because if you have people united and strong, sometimes it doesn't go with what you're trying to get done. So you might, like Wesley said, you try to divide and conquer. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with?
Yes.
Will, do you agree that we have strength when we can unite and combine under a like goal or principle?
Yes, I believe that. That is right.
Okay. Anything else, guys? First Amendment stuff? I think we covered everything. Do you guys have any other last bits of information you want to say about it or anything?
A part about the free speech, and I watched this in a YouTube video once, and I believe it was China or Japan, a country in Asia. They didn't have like the right to speak out, and if any in the newspapers or on the news or really anywhere, people were talking bad about the government, then they got sent to prison or killed, because laws are a lot different there. That follows another amendment too. But after the 2008 Olympics, I believe, it loosened up a little bit. So yeah.
Wow, I think that's awesome that you're able to see and compare what happens in some of these other countries, that it's easy for us to take for granted here in the United States, the benefit of we have of just being able to have that First Amendment that protects us from that kind of stuff, from a government that can control us by controlling our speech, controlling the religion that we can practice, controlling our ability to assemble with other people just because they don't like it. So it's a First Amendment for a reason, I think, and that's because it holds so much power behind it, and us being able to do that as citizens for the reasons you just pointed out that citizens in other countries don't have. I think that's a good point to wrap up. Good conversation today, boys. I think you guys had some good points to make and give some people a lot to think about. So with that, we will see you guys on the next Tattered podcast.